This is my binder of shame. I've had this binder since I was 7 years old, and despite its beautiful artwork, it's filled with lies, aka fake Pokemon cards. But because I grew up collecting and later having to identify fake Pokemon cards, I know a thing or two about spotting a real one. So today we're taking a look at some of my cards in here and making sure you don't make the same mistakes I did. And while all these tips are important, the last tip is the key to putting everything I'm about to tell you together. So don't miss that. The first and easiest way to tell if a card is fake is incorrect text or spelling mistakes. If we take a good look at our friend Kakuna here, you'll see that Kakuna is actually an Ivysaur. This is obviously a more striking example, but other cards can have more minor spelling mistakes that give them away. Another quick one is to check that the word Pokemon has the little hyphen over the E. And while this is one of the most obvious ways to spot a fake, just because the spelling is correct on a card doesn't mean it's real. It takes a very small amount of effort just to make sure that cards don't have spelling mistakes. It's just that some people aren't willing to put that much effort in apparently. Or maybe they just really like the Weedle family. Next, we have the font. Now this one takes a bit more of a closer look. Essentially, it's quite hard to replicate the exact font that the Pokemon company uses on any of their cards, but it's not hard to get close. We can take a look at these two Vaporeon cards, for example. One is real and one is fake. As you can see here, the fonts on the cards are slightly different, with the real one on the right having slightly thicker letters for the bold writing and slightly wider and thicker letters for the regular writing. This takes a little bit more care, but it can be pretty obvious when you put the two side by side like this. Next up, we're going to talk about holo patterns. Pokemon cards have had hundreds of different types of holo patterns over the years. And nowadays, it can be even more difficult to replicate them. This can be one of the best ways to spot a fake card. Take these cards from my collection, for example. If this card was real, it would actually have a holographic foil. But as you can see here, they've just printed a holo pattern onto the card itself. This is one of the lousiest fakes and pretty easy to spot, but they can get more advanced. This card here actually does have holo foil, but by looking more closely you can see that the holo is flat and the pattern is actually printed on. It's just flat foil. In more modern Pokemon cards, you'll notice that holos can sometimes only cover some parts of the card. This is really common and can be a great way to spot a fake, as real Pokemon cards will often only have holo patterns in things like the background and the Pokemon's eyes. If a card has a holo pattern that covers the entire card in a flat manner, this can be a really dead giveaway that it's a fake. Some modern Pokemon cards also have texture. Almost no fakes have this. It's an incredible amount of work to replicate. Checking to see if your card should have texture, and if it does have texture, can be a really easy way to spot if it's real. And hey, if you sell real Pokemon cards, you should check out my software, Cardmaster. It lets you upload your cards fast. The next thing we can look at is the back of the card. Now you might think that the back would be easy to replicate. It's the same across every Pokemon card, so surely the fakes have worked out how to do it. But not quite. The back of the card can be a great way to spot a fake. The first thing we can look at is the color. This is an extreme example where my friend Kakuna here is a completely different color to the back of a real card. But it can be more subtle. This particular spot on Pokemon cards can be a really good way to tell if it's fake. Even on the best fake backs of Pokemon cards, often this spot will be missing the dark blue color that's present in real ones. There's a few other ways that we can possibly identify a card can be fake, but these get a little bit trickier. Card feel is a massive advantage to being able to spot a fake, but there's a couple of issues. Firstly, you don't always have the card. If you're buying a card online, you can't always touch it, so you don't know what it feels like. Secondly, this takes practice. If you've handled hundreds, or let's face it, thousands of Pokemon cards, your brain will get to know subconsciously how it should feel. Real cards have a slightly papery texture and aren't totally smooth, and they have a very specific thickness and weight. Fake cards are often either over or under laminated, being too smooth or too rough, or too thick or too thin. And to be able to tell this takes time. The longer you're in the hobby, the easier it will get. The other thing we can try is the flashlight test. Now this only works on cards that should have a holo pattern on them. When working with holos, you shouldn't be able to see a light shine all the way through a card. While we mentioned earlier that holo patterns shouldn't always be visible flat across the card, the way that the cards are constructed, the holo foil layer sits underneath the ink of the card, which means when you shine your phone light straight through it, the foil layer should block the light from coming through the other side. If a light is shining through your holographic card, it means either there is no foil layer at all, or it's not the correct foil material. This obviously works with only holographic cards, and you should be careful as light strengths can vary and it could produce some false positives. Okay, this is it, the most important tip to check if your Pokemon cards are fake. But before I tell you, if this video has been valuable, make sure you subscribe. The most important way to tell if a Pokemon card is fake is to Google it. Almost none of the tactics we've talked about today will work if you don't have a real reference of the card. And most of the time, you won't have a real one to compare it to. So, Use the set code in the bottom and the card name up the top to Google the card you're looking at and carefully inspect all of the things we've talked about today. Check the spelling, check the font. Get really close and look at the distances between where the text ends on the card and try to line it up with certain other features of the card. Does it have the correct spacing? Should there be any texture on the card? This also saves you from buying the types of cards on eBay that are completely fabricated and don't exist in an official print at all. If you type in the set number and name and the card doesn't pop up or it looks completely different, that card does not exist and it is a fake. And if you want to see this in action, I just bought a whole collection and looked through to see if we had any fake cards. You can watch that video next.